Afternoon. I'm going to take you quickly just through a couple of key, few topic areas. I'm going to talk very quickly about my business, give you a little sense of the roller coaster ride I've been on in dealing with this law, moving from absolute denial and never thinking it was applicable to the shock and awe that I'm going through now in realizing what it could possibly do to the business. Reality has set in, and I'm still at a point of not knowing what I don't know. It will have an impact on my business, and I'll close with a few thoughts about what I think this could do to small business in general. As Ray shared with you earlier, I spent my first life at Marriott for about 27 years, left them in 2000, took a couple of years off, and did what I swore I would never do, got in the restaurant business. I told my wife, and more so my kids, that I was going to invest their inheritance and wish me luck. I was an early franchisee with 5 guys. I committed back in early 2004 to develop 11 restaurants in the Raleigh-Durham metro area. I currently have 8 restaurants open and operating in 5 different cities in the Greater Triangle. As of my last payroll cycle, I have 147 people on the payroll. 60 of those meet the test of a full-time employee, not equivalent. 60 of them are working over 30 hours a week. And in 2012, my annual payroll for all the restaurants combined exceeded $2.2 million. Early on, when the law was being debated in Congress, before it was being passed, and even after it got passed, my attitude was no worries. I'm not going to be affected. As Bob mentioned, I was one of those who, for other reasons, I set up my business structure as each restaurant is its own individual LLC. Each one's got its own federal employment identification number. At no point in time, I think, has any restaurant probably had more than 25 people working. I was fat, dumb, and happy. I'm not happy anymore. I was completely tuned out to a lot of the discussion that was going on related to the Health Care Act, because it just didn't fit. But as 2012 rolled around, some of the meat was being put on the bones of the law. Regulations were coming to be talked about. I was having more discussions with fellow franchisees. I began to get worried, and then one afternoon I got a call from the son of a friend of mine who was in the benefits consulting business, and he started talking to me about the Affordable Care Act and how it's going to affect my business, and he's dealing with other franchisees, and hey, can we get together? And I said, I don't really want to waste your time. I said, I've got 8 restaurants, no, not one of them employs more than 20 people. I'm not affected. And he said, oh, yes, you are. And I said, how could that be? And he started to educate me about what I'm talking about, this whole issue of common control, which are a part of the ERISA laws that began back in 1974. So once I was no longer numb, I began getting in touch with my attorney, engaged health benefits law legal experts within his firm, and began learning about ERISA laws, the issues of common control. Again, what Bob talked about, husband-wife situations, brother-sister, sibling situations, just to see, is there any conceivable structure where I can not be affected by the law? And it doesn't appear that there is. Even to the extent where if I somehow sold units, got rid of units, no longer had a financial interest, but still had management responsibility for those, they're telling me that's still coming back under the same umbrella, and that employee headcount is going to be part of my bogey. So that was disheartening. From there, I began to do a lot more reading. Anytime I get any kind of email talking about a webinar dealing with the Affordable Care Act and the employer mandate, I'm signing up for that thing in a heartbeat. I've learned more about something I cared less about than I can tell you. You know, I've sat through webinars with Paychex, ADP, HR.com, and each time I go through one, there's more that makes me uncomfortable. Some statistics that gave me a little bit of comfort in that I'm not the only one feeling the way I do. Roughly 7% of employers feel their organizations don't understand the requirements of the employer mandate. Misery loves company, and there's a lot of it. Only 50% of mid-sized companies have even bothered to estimate what their FTE count is. Almost 50% estimate current coverage would not meet the affordability test. And lastly, only 27% of mid-sized companies have estimated what their potential penalty costs could be. In recent meetings I've had with payroll and benefits experts, they as professionals dealing with this day in, day out are tremendously frustrated. They're frustrated because they don't have all the information that they need to counsel their clients well. What they do know is that costs are going to go up. To anyone who's currently providing health care, because of this whole issue of essential health benefits that have to be packaged in, what can and can't have copays, costs are going to go up. And it's scaring the heck out of a lot of people. Companies that currently offer health care, I'm being told by some of these folks that they think a lot of their clients are going to be pushing coverage out to exchanges, just getting rid of whatever health care coverage they currently have. And the thing that bothered me the most that I got last week is no matter how much or how hard I try to plan right now, it's very likely that it'll be probably at least July before any of the major insurers are going to be able to look a potential client in the face and give them some idea what health care coverage is going to cost. So where does that leave me in employing 150 and having 8 restaurants truly in the bullseye of the Affordable Care Act? I've spent a lot of time looking at and in what positions those full-time employees, what they're doing. Trying to think, okay, if I were to cut them back under 30, what does that do strategically and operationally to my restaurants? I mean, many of you may be familiar with Five Guys. I mean, it's not rocket science. It's very sad. It's burgers, fries, and dogs. It doesn't get any simpler. But there's still great value to having trained, experienced, dependable staff. And what this law is heaping on me flies in the face of being able to maximize that. The other thing I'm concerned about for my employees is this whole notion of shared responsibility. It's nowhere on my employees' radar screen. I think if I had 20 of my employees in the room and asked them, do they realize that beginning in 2014, if they don't have health care coverage, that they're going to be paying a penalty when they file their taxes the following year? I'd bet 1 out of 20 might even have a notion of that. I don't think they have any sense for their participation in this as well. Today, I can't fully assess the fiscal and operational impact of the Act and especially the employer mandate. At best, I can quantify what the penalty exists at any moment in time. So my last payroll cycle, I've got 60 full-time employees. That's going to cost me $60,000. And the good news is about the $60,000 penalty is I get to pay that after tax. And because it's a penalty, it's not considered a business expense. So another kind of way of looking at it is just take one of my restaurants and wipe out the profit. It's gone. Just running that restaurant to pay for the pleasure of participating in the Affordable Care Act. The other challenge, and I think this especially hits hard in the restaurant industry where we tend to have a lower average wage worker, is trying to meet that affordability test is going to be tough. 9.5% of full-time worker working 30 hours a week, making somewhere between toward the lower end, toward near minimum wage, $7.50 to $8 an hour. they're going to have less than $90 a week, pardon me, $90 a month that they can contribute toward the premium for an affordable plan. Anything beyond that, roughly, the plan would not meet the affordability test. Then if I don't offer something that's affordable, I get penalized even more. It goes from $2,000 to $3,000. That's, again, even more uncertainty. So I could even be out there trying to do the right thing and end up being punished for trying to do the right thing because I didn't quite get the numbers right. Bob talked about adding 3 bedrooms to my house. There are reasons why I wouldn't want to do that. But there is going to be a significant and ongoing administrative burden that's going to affect G&A expense for the business. When you operate a small business, even one the size of mine, I do a lot of the things, and I do a lot of the HR myself, trying to stay on top of who's approaching or surpassing 30 hours a week in the look-back period. Am I using a 3-month or a 6-month? Then getting people signed up. It's mind-boggling, but it's part of the future. And likely any added cost to the business is going to have to get passed through to the customer. In closing, just a couple of thoughts on implications for small business kind of in general. There's a part of me that I'd love to be able to offer health care to my employees. It wasn't something that when I studied the business and the economics of the business before getting in it, it wasn't really a factor. A lot of the employees didn't tend to have it. It was not generally offered. And so I think the economic and financial structure of a lot of chain restaurant businesses out there, this is going to have a significant impact. And, as those costs go up, the risk is having to pass that through to the customer. But as you pass on costs to the customer, an even greater risk is a strategic risk. Regardless of what your product is, does your product lose whatever price value proposition you currently have with the consumer you're serving? And once you do that, then you've got other problems beyond not being able to adequately provide health care. Right now, I've got 3 more restaurants that I need to develop to meet my commitment to 5 guys. I'm kind of in a holding pattern. I'm still continuing to look at sites, but because these costs are unknown, I really don't know how to fully model the economics of what that next restaurant might throw off. And the last thing any of us would want to do is make an investment where you're not going to get a reasonable rate of return on it. For those of us in the business, the equity value of the restaurants we currently have operating is going to have to take a big hit. If all of a sudden you have thousands of dollars coming off the EBITDA of a business, and that's the value in which any kind of sale transaction would be based, anyone in the restaurant business today who's going to be dealing with this law is going to be impacted significantly by the financial implications of it. And as I stand here today, and again, my fellow panelists alluded to it, the only surefire way to preserve the current business value is to shrink the size of the business, is to get under those thresholds. In my case, sell units or reduce workforce. Now, I hope I don't wake up tomorrow and find that I've got a revolt going on down in Raleigh because they heard that I was going to be reducing my workforce. But certainly, capping people at 30 hours a week, trying to cap FTEs or full-time employees total in the business at 30, because if you go the penalty route, you don't have to pay the penalty on the first 30. Those have to be rational considerations that anyone in my situation has to consider. None of these are encouraging considerations. I'd much rather be standing here today talking about how many more stores I can build and how fast I can grow my business, because it's what I've enjoyed doing for the last 9 years. But we're at a point right now where there's so much uncertainty.